Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please smash that subscribe button. Also consider being a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amounts in the link given in the description box. But the least you can do is like, share, and comment. Without further ado, let me welcome Professor Mohammad Marandi. Professor Marandi is a professor at the University of Dhaka. Professor Marandi, welcome back to India and Global Left.
Thank you for inviting me again. It's always a pleasure.
Let's jump with what's going on in the Red Sea. On Saturday and Sunday, the U.S. began airstrikes on Yemen, killing at least 32 people and injuring 101, most of them women and children. The attacks came after Yemeni rebel groups Ansar Allah, also known as the Houthis, threatened to resume attacks on Israeli-linked ships in the Red Sea over Israel's total blockade of outside aid in food, fuel, and energy from entering the Gaza Strip directly. As we speak, the Houthis just claimed a missile and a drone attack on the U.S. aircraft carrier Harry S. Truman, from which the attack on Yemen was carried out on Saturday and today. U.S. officials have denied the attack so far. What is your response, Professor Marandi, to the U.S. attack on Yemen?
First, I should point out that this is not a rebel group. They are the government of Yemen. They've been in control of the capital, and 80% of the population of Yemen live in areas that are controlled by Ansarullah and its allies. In any other country, they would be called the government. But since the West dislikes them, they'll call them rebels. So they can hold elections, they can hold the whole country, they can hold five different countries, but they'll still be called a rebel because they are not seen as legitimate in the eyes of the West, and only those who uh, follow U.S. Policy in the region, they are deemed as legitimate, whether they have any elections or not, whether they are family dictatorships or not, whether they're military dictatorships, it doesn't matter. They are governments, and this is a rebel group, but it is a government. It is the government of Yemen. This is Sana'a, where they govern. It is the city of Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, from which they govern, and they've been doing that for over a decade now. And despite all the genocidal wars backed by the West, whether it was the Saudis and the Emiratis who were backed by the West, who carried out a genocidal war for 7 years, or the West under Biden and now Trump, whether they directly carried out genocidal wars against the people of Yemen, these Ansarullah and their allies are still in government because they have popular legitimacy. All those hundreds of billions of dollars that the Saudis and the Emiratis spent that have all been wasted and have led to the deaths of so many innocent people in Yemen, that was useless. It was useless in and it failed to bring about change in Yemen because Ansarullah is popular, because people see it as their representative, as legitimate. Otherwise, if it was not legitimate, if it was not popular, how could it survive all these genocidal wars and all these hundreds of billions of dollars and all of these mercenary armies that were funded by the Saudis and the Emiratis? It would have been impossible. So this is the legitimate government of Yemen, and what they are doing is, as they did under Biden, was that they are implementing the Genocide Convention. They are saying we're going to shut down the Red Sea to shipping linked to the Israeli regime as long as it's carrying out the genocide. That's what they were saying during the height of the Holocaust in Yemen, in Gaza. And now they're saying that the Israeli regime has to stop the hunger siege, the starvation siege against Gaza. So all Yemen is saying is that they should allow children to have food. And instead of Trump attacking Israel or punishing Israel to force them to allow food to get in, to allow medicine to get in, to allow water to get in, to allow people to have electricity and medical supplies, they're bombing the people of Yemen We're trying to force the Israeli regime to stop the hunger siege. It is utterly amazing. I don't think there has been anything so, it's good against evil. It's clear as day. We've had, in the past, we've had the Western Empire carry out the most horrific atrocities, especially in Africa, but in other parts of the world. But today it's being done in front of the eyes of the world. That's what's different. This is unique. This is not like what the Europeans did the Belgians did in Congo. That was, the numbers were huge, but we never saw it. There was no internet. There was no social media. Now we're seeing as it happens, people being killed. As just yesterday, the Israeli regime, it's not really a ceasefire. They're murdering Palestinians every day. Just yesterday, they murdered 11 Palestinians, including a couple of journalists. In Lebanon, over the past 24 hours, they've killed 3 Lebanese citizens. And the guarantors, meaning Western regimes, they've done nothing about it. So for them, the starvation siege in Gaza is fine. Murdering Palestinians every day is fine. As guarantors, they have no problem with it. But Yemen, if they say that the Israelis must allow food to get in, they get bombed. This is the dystopia that the West has created for the world. It is a dystopia that existed for those of us who read a bit of history and who know about the history of Africa and Latin America and the Americas and Asia and India and the Opium Wars and so on. For those of us who've been, who read these things, we know a thing or two. But this is, again, as I said, unique because it's being carried out in front of our eyes shamelessly. And if you oppose it, they kill you. At least in the case of Yemen.
It's interesting you mentioned that some groups would continue to be rebels even though they control large parts of a country, if not the whole of it, while others, you can think of Syria, would not be rebels, even while they also don't control all of Syria. But yeah, comment on that if you like. But my next question is on Trump administration, because Trump came with the image that he loves peace, he doesn't like war, and a lot of people naively believe in that image. But talking from Yemen's perspective, it is quite the opposite, if at all, at least during the Biden administration, the genocidal administration, where was very reluctant to call it a war. They actually said that it was a very limited operation in opposition to what they defined as an attack on the American people. Trump administration, on the other hand, said that it's in fact, the U.S. Central Command, which oversees American operations in the Middle East, said that the strikes are the beginning of a large-scale offensive across Yemen. And Trump himself said that he is ordering to attack the Houthi leaders. So, if at all, this is a major escalation under Trump administration. Can you talk about this mythical image of a peace-loving Trump?
That is one of the most extraordinary things that we've been hearing, even from some friends who I think have been naive, or maybe, or it's understandable. Some people want to have hope. They want to believe that maybe the United States can change, but the United States can't change. At least with this under the current regime, it's irredeemable. There's no real difference between Trump and Biden. The difference in their policy over Ukraine is because Ukraine is a lost war, and Trump has come to realize that, and he took advantage of it during the first. Even just recently, he was boasting about the fact that he gave the javelins to Ukraine to take out the Russian tanks. And he's not a man of peace. He never was. During his reign, during his first term, he continued the occupation of Afghanistan, even though he spoke about withdrawing. He never left Syria, even though he spoke about withdrawing. He murdered Iranian and Iraqi officials, senior officials who were fighting ISIS and Al Qaeda. The people who were key to defeating ISIS and Al Qaeda in Syria and Iraq was General Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes, and he murdered them and their staff, the people who were with them at Baghdad International Airport. And General Soleimani went to Iraq to meet the prime minister. The Iraqi prime minister at that time was scheduled to meet General Soleimani at 8 in the morning, 7 hours after he was martyred, to discuss a letter from Saudi Arabia about potential rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So he went to Iraq in order to discuss rapprochement with Saudi Arabia, de-escalation, General Soleimani. And what did Trump do? He murdered him and the others. So this is definitely not a man of peace. The person, by the way, who said this was the former Iraqi prime minister himself. He said that's why he came to Iraq. He was supposed to have breakfast with me. When the Iraqi prime minister says that's, and I'm sure the Americans knew exactly why he was there. Now, he's never been a man of peace. Trump is an extension of he promotes the same policies as do others. In the case of Ukraine, it was a lost war, and the only way out was for a new president to blame the previous regime and to take a different course. And we will probably, I think, although it's not going as well as Trump had hoped, but I think ultimately, at some point, there will be an end to the war. I think we are entering the final stages, though it may take longer than many of us hope for it to stop. But in any case, when it comes to Palestine in our region, it's the same policy. Remember, Trump, while he was behind the ceasefire, while he pushed for the ceasefire, as soon as the ceasefire took place, he rejected it. He said Palestinians must leave. They must be expelled from Gaza. And then he threatened to kill all Palestinians in Gaza if the American hostages weren't released. So he threatened to kill 2 million people. That is Donald Trump. He has absolutely no sense of morality, no honor, no shame, no dignity. He's another Biden, but he looks different and he doesn't have dementia. But I think it's become clear as day for what we are seeing in Yemen today is probably the clearest case of good against evil.
In
Trump
fact,
wants to attack Yemen because Yemen is trying to stop the genocide. It's as simple as that. I mean, you have good versus bad. You have, bad sides fighting each other. You have countries that are, but this is the issue. This is exactly the issue. One side says we must stop the genocide, and the other side says if you try to stop the genocide, I'll bomb you. That's the story.
you mentioned General Qasem Soleimani. I remember when Trump in 2020 ordered a drone strike to kill General Soleimani, head of the Quds Force of Iran's IRGC. The same hour, he ordered an attack against Abdul Reza Saleh, the IRGC commander in Yemen. So it reveals a lot, and I think this leads me into the next question, which is that the United States called the Houthis a proxy of Iran. In fact, Marco Rubio, the United States Secretary of State, yesterday said that the Houthis can't have the capability to attack global shipping unless Iran backs them. So, in Trump's administration's mind, therefore, attacking Yemen is part of the maximum pressure strategy on Iran. If Professor Marandi, you could respond to whether there is any merit to the allegation that Houthis' attack on Israeli ship is a proxy attack on behalf of Iran, Or is it just a red herring to deflect attention from the real issue, which is Israeli government's unilateral withdrawal from the ceasefire agreement after 2 months of dilly-dallying to vacate the Philadelphia corridor in Gaza, refusing to stop killing the Gazans and blockading aid in food, fuel, and medicine?
Well, if the the Yemeni government is incapable of attacking ships in the Red Sea without the Iranians, the Israeli regime is incapable of carrying out genocide in Gaza. It's incapable of waging war against the Palestinian people or the Lebanese people without the United States. The Israeli regime is incapable of bombing Iran without the United States. The Israeli regime would not exist if it wasn't for the support of the collective West, day and night. During this almost year and a half long genocide, ships and planes were coming in day and night with ammunition into ports controlled by the Israeli regime, bringing in ammunition, bringing in weapons, bringing in aid, economic assistance, all sorts of assistance to keep the regime afloat. So if that's the argument that they want to make, then the first regime that should be considered a proxy would be the Israeli regime. That is the ultimate proxy based upon that particular definition. Ansar Allah, without a doubt, or the Yemeni armed forces, without a doubt, they have Iranian support. The Iranians do not hide that. But the point is that Ansar Allah has agency. They make their own decisions. If Ansar Allah was a proxy, if they were just Iranian mercenaries, how would it be able to survive all these years of genocidal war? A proxy couldn't do that. They have the popular support of the people. That's why they withstood all the mercenary armies that the Saudis and the Emiratis and others put together, the day and night bombings that the Saudis and the Emiratis carried out, where you had the Europeans and the Canadians and the North Americans and the Australians sending in everything that the Saudis and the Emiratis needed to carry out the genocide. Remember, before the genocide in Gaza, we had the genocide in Yemen. But the difference was that in the case of Yemen, no one cared. The media, no one supported them. Al Jazeera, which supports Al Qaeda and ISIS in Syria shamelessly, in the case of Gaza, they supported the people of Palestine. But in the case of Yemen, when the Saudis began and the Emiratis began the genocidal war, Qatar and Al Jazeera and Turkey, they all supported the genocidal attacks. So all the media was against Ansarullah. All the media was against the Arabic media in particular, but also the Western media, of course. They were against the people of Yemen. So, and then of course later on, Al Jazeera shifted its position when the Saudis and the Emiratis ganged up against Qatar. And the Turkey shifted, but they were supporting genocide. So before we had this, we had another genocide in Yemen, but that genocide was not being shown to the world like what we've been seeing in Gaza. So basically, what we have is Yemen standing up to the collective West and the regional proxies, and that means that Yemen is not a proxy. That means that the state has popular support. They have agency. And as a result, they make their own decisions. And their decision was to block the genocide, to block the Red Sea to those carrying out genocide. And now they said if the Israeli regime fails or refrains from discontinuing the starvation siege that's been going on for a couple of weeks now, they will block the Red Sea. They weren't blocking the Red Sea a few days ago. They said if they continue the ceasefire, even though they've been killing Palestinians every day, but if they continue the ceasefire, we will hold our fire. That's what they've been doing. But this regime has been starving children for 2 weeks. The West says nothing about it. No one complains about it. They felt that they had to take a stand. So the decision was theirs. Iran supports them without a doubt. But that doesn't mean they don't have agency. The difference actually between the axis of resistance and the West is that the axis of resistance, all of them have agency. All of them have popular support. All of them have volunteers who are fighting. Hezbollah sacrificed its young men. Mothers sent their sons to the war front. Wives sent their husbands to the war front to help save the people of Gaza. Hezbollah fought for 13 months against the Israeli regime, drew the army away from Gaza so that Gaza could breathe. This is not a proxy. This is a heroic group, a movement that Hezbollah that sacrificed itself for another people. The Palestinians were fighting for their own lives. Hezbollah was fighting for someone else's life and honor and dignity. And the same is true with Ansarullah. So they're not proxies, but Iran, yes, of course Iran will support them. But the support that Iran gives to Ansarullah or Hezbollah or the people of or Hamas and Islamic Jihad pales in comparison to what the West does for the Israeli regime alone.
Would it be fair to understand this unprovoked attack on Yemen? And I call this unprovoked because there hasn't been much fired by Ansar Allah lately since the ceasefire in January came up formally. The fires were between November and December. Whatever 145 missiles and drone attacks were there, it was mostly in November and December. So this attack was a response to a threat that the Houthis had posed. And I wonder if it is actually a part of a larger hawkish strategy on Iran, given all the Steve Witkoffs and Rubios, all the Iran hawks are put in place in this administration.
Without a doubt, this is about the axis of resistance, and this is about the Israeli regime. The Americans and the Europeans, they want this racist, ethno-supremacist regime to rule supreme over the region around it. That is why they destroyed Syria. Those who support Jolani, or those who've supported Jolani, wittingly or unwittingly, during all these years, they've been supporting Israel. They've been supporting the Israeli regime. They've been supporting the United States. And we now see the fruits of the fruit of that policy, the destruction of Syria. And now we see Jolani do nothing in the face of the Israeli regime occupying huge swathes of territory in Syria, yet he's very courageous in slaughtering women and children alongside the coast. With the full support of his backers and Western media trying to blame the victims. You see Al Jazeera and Turkey and all these and regional countries supporting him in the face as he's carrying out these atrocities. But people's eyes have opened now. People who a decade ago saw the dirty war in Syria in a different light, a very different light. Now today they see reality. Only those who are narrow, who want to keep their eyes closed, or those who are so deeply sectarian that they will pursue their disgusting sectarian and takfiri ideology, no matter what happens. Except for that group, everyone else knows what's going on in Syria. So the United States destroyed Syria. The United States and the West want to see Lebanon crippled. They want to see Yemen crippled because they want the Israeli regime to rule. And of course, Iran is the country that supports the Palestinian people. There's, people may try to hide this, many have tried to hide this fact, but everyone is doing business as usual with Israel, whether they have relations with the Israeli regime like Turkey and Egypt and Jordan or the Emirates or Morocco, or those who don't, but are doing business behind the scenes. All of them are working with the Israeli regime. All of them are buying and selling goods, and they have intelligence cooperation with the Israelis. But in the case of Iran, Iran is supporting the axis of resistance. So Yemen is about Yemen, it's about Iran too, but it's about the whole axis of resistance. The Americans right now, the Europeans, in their love for ethno-supremacism, are now talking to themselves and convincing themselves that the axis of resistance is weak. Hezbollah has been broken, Hamas has been broken, Islamic Jihad has been broken, which is not the case. They've been saying that, by the way, about Russia for 3 years. Remember the washing machines or the dishwashing machines, and that they were, taking out the chips in order to make weapons, and that the Russians were losing. They've been saying that for 3 years. Well, what's happened? The Russians won the war, basically. Yes, of course, Hezbollah has been hurt. Of course, Hamas has been hurt. Of course, Islamic Jihad has been hurt. In war, everyone is hurt. But comparatively speaking, the Israeli regime has suffered the most. They have been delegitimized in the eyes of the international community. They are now known to be genocidal. They are criminals. And the people know that the overwhelming majority of these Zionists are genocidal, according to their own polls. And people see Jews in Europe and the United States saying no to Zionism. So that people are waking up. They see that this is not Judaism. They see that this is an ethno-supremacist regime that is illegitimate, that is morally illegitimate. This is the greatest defeat that comes out of this war. Some people may say, no, this is morality doesn't count. In my opinion, morality is huge. Morality is the most important thing of all. Those people who lost, who've been kicked out of university in the United States, they sacrificed for a moral cause. Those who lost their lives in Lebanon, Hezbollah, drawing this brutal, barbaric army away from Gaza, they fought for a noble cause. They fought for a moral cause. And the same is true with Yemen, and the same is true with all those who are whether they are in the axis of resistance or whether in the broader resistance across the globe, whether they're Muslim or Christian or Hindus or Jews or whatever, from different walks of life, from different races, from different nationalities, they're all the resistance. So this the moral issue here is key, and Israel has been exposed to the world. So I believe that the Israeli regime has suffered the most out of all these different entities that were involved in the war, because they did suffer militarily, they did suffer economically, but they have been exposed. So in my opinion, these interpretations in the West that the axis of resistance has failed and that it's fallen apart and that it's been weakened, that's wishful thinking. That sort of wishful thinking existed with in Ukraine for 3 years, and now we see that the reality is quite different. But I believe that the United States will fail in Yemen. They will murder people, they'll slaughter people, they will cause immense suffering. That's what they've been doing for well over a decade in Yemen with the Saudis and the Emiratis, and later on Biden in support of the genocide in Gaza. But they will fail. And the people of Yemen they are playing a heroic role in defending the people of Gaza. In my opinion, Hezbollah and Ansarullah are the shining stars in this year and a half. They have made huge sacrifices for another people. They're not even defending themselves. They could have stayed out of this, but they chose to come to the aid of Palestinians, and that will be remembered in history.
Talking about lies, if I can ask you a final question on media propaganda, particularly regarding the ceasefire, given that's the central issue in what we are discussing today. And I remember you were one of the few people who were the first to say that the ceasefire is bound to fail. I mean, there were a few others, John Mearsheimer and others, but you were one of the very first to say in January, mid-January itself, that this ceasefire is a bluff, is a red herring. On the other hand, if anyone reads the mainstream media, Western media in general, uh, there has been a pretension for more than 2 months now that this has been a monumental step forward, made possible at the first instance on the behest of the mediating role of the United States. Um, until now that the ceasefire is officially dead. If you could talk a little bit about why did the Western media concoct this image that this ceasefire is a monumental step forward made on at the behest of the mediating role by the United States?
Because they want Israel to disappear from the front pages of newspapers, or nowadays it's Telegram channels, or Twitter or Instagram, or of course a lot of it's deleted, and censorship reigns in the West. It rules in the West, but the West is censoring everything, TikTok, for example. But they want this to go away. They want it to be forgotten, because the Israeli regime has been doing for a year and a half has outraged the world. It has outraged young Americans and Europeans who are propagandized more than any other people across the world, because the West controls the media and they control it in their own countries more than anywhere else. So there never was a ceasefire. On average, roughly 3 Palestinians in Gaza have been slaughtered every day since the so-called ceasefire began. 3 a day. Every single day. In Lebanon, they're killing 1 a day. They just murder people. They see someone driving on the road, they just kill them. They're citizens, they live in those towns, they just murder them. And the Western media will either be silent or they'll justify it somehow. And then for the last 2 weeks, we have a starvation siege. You don't hear about it in the Western media. A starvation siege, a nation, a people are being starved. Not in the news. And while all this is happening, I mean, this is the same Western media that tried to justify what happened on the coast in Syria, where these ISIS and Al-Qaeda monsters were slaughtering women and children. The EU was trying to blame the victims. Even though we saw the footage online, they couldn't hide it, but the EU statement was so utterly outrageous. But um, but in addition to all that, what we're seeing now in the West Bank, the ethnic cleansing that's taking place there is extraordinary. They're demolishing different towns and cities, and in neighborhoods, and different refugee camps and cities. They've been doing it for almost 2 months now, killing people, destroying their homes in an unprecedented way. You don't hear that in the Western media. They're
Also,
trying to hide. They're trying to hide Israel. They don't want us to hear much about the regime anymore, because for a year and a half, people have become sick of this regime.
yeah, I just also wanted to plug in the West Bank thing because we did a full show with you. Hundreds of thousands of people watched it. And it's very, very important that the mainstream media has been distorting not just the images of what has happened in Gaza, but also has completely silenced this de facto annexation of a huge number of refugee camps in urban Palestine, urban West Bank, and huge amount of settlement expansion in the rural West Bank. We did a full show with you. But Professor Marandi, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.